Okay, Krizia, it's your turn now. We just got off with Dr. Mel. That was super cool. And you're also going to have something for us during your interview that will be hands-on for our younger viewers.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to that. But first off, you are the program coordinator for Women in Engineering at UC. Can you tell us what your job entails and what are some of your main responsibilities?
So I work alongside with the women engineering director to, recruit, meaning bring females, women into engineering. Once they're there, we help them, we support them by giving programming, events, or anything else that might need. But we also work with women, faculty, and staff to professional development and to also provide support. Engineering is out of the STEM fields, it's one of those that has a really low representation of women and girls. So it's important to create safe spaces. So that is basically the next. I do programming. My door, even though it's virtual now, it's always open. So we're kind of like this unicorn. We help all females, all women, from the moment that they're just exploring engineering and applied science to the moment that they're actually in their field and they're educating the next generation.
No, and that's awesome. And you touched on that engineering in and of itself has less women in the field, and I imagine it also has less women of color in the field.
I can't remember the exact statistic, but I believe it's like 18 to 20% women in engineering and applied science. And so that's just women in general. So the women of color is probably around 2 to 4, depending on the field. There's some fields that are more densely populated by women, or women tend to gravitate towards it, like chemical, environmental, and biomedical engineering.
Okay.
I believe it's because the way that we are socialized, females tend to be raised more nurturing, so you tend to go to those fields. So you see less women in aerospace or computer engineering. They're still there and they're still rocking. It's just there's less representation.
Okay. And you have a background in biology. So were you always interested in STEM growing up, or did this interest develop later?
So I always liked science. I really enjoyed math growing up. So I'm kind of different than Dr. Mel, even though my path changed when I grew up. So I really like science, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I remember being in high school, and one week I wanted to be an architect. The other day I wanted to be a teacher. The other day I wanted to be a doctor. And then, so every week I would change careers, which is very normal. Like you're just exploring, you're 16, you don't know who you are. And it's a fun time to discover. Also, we don't know what our talents are. Like we are not, as humans, it's really hard for a lot of us to know exactly what we're really good at. If you ask me, I have the hardest time in performance reviews. I was like, I don't know what my strengths are. I don't have any. And I do, I just don't.
You do, yes.
I just don't know. So imagine a 16-year-old me, and I'm like, I think I could go do this. So I remember being in biology, and I had a teacher who, we started the DNA replication segment, and I was just fascinated. It was like, I really did well in science anyway, but then all of a sudden they were teaching this very intricate process that was very, very important to who we are as living organisms. And I was like, oh my God. So I loved it. And then genetics happened. So I started gravitating more towards life sciences. And then when I was going into my senior year, I had the opportunity to explore what type of life science. So I could have got into just a biological degree, but I really love diving deep into things that you can't see with the naked eye. So I went into cell and molecular biology, and I don't regret it. I loved it.
Awesome. And what is that type of biology? Can you explain a little bit
So we
further?
study anything that is related with cells, and within the cells. So any processes that's occurring, we study microbes. We study the genetic and things that happen within those organ cells and self, and the structures in it. So you could have an organism that's smaller in size, or you can have just the cell itself and studying the structure. And that's from all different organisms. So it could be a bacteria, it could be a animal cell, or it could be a plant cell.
All right. Quick break there, everyone. We had someone else join us. Scarlett, one of our youth volunteers at the museum centers here. And Krizia, you specifically studied cellular biology, correct? And what was your journey like to get to where you are through school? You grew up in Puerto Rico. Did you come to the States to study? Did you study partially in Puerto Rico? Can you kind of walk us through some of that?
So I did both. I lived all my life back home till I was 22. So I got my undergrad back home. I did come to the States. I was privileged that I was able to come to the States during the summer. So I would do my academic years back home. The classes, I always joke that, so the classes are in Spanish. So I'm taking science classes in Spanish, but the books are in English, because that's more of like the scientific universal language currently.
Okay.
So it's really funny to be in this dual of like, I'm seeing the professor teaching and talking and going on in Spanish, but my books are completely different. So it's really funny to actually learn terms in both in English and in Spanish, because sometimes they don't sound nothing similar. And they're really, we used to joke about it. I was like, I don't think who came up with the Spanish name for spliceosomes? Like, who was in this meeting, which ensamblesomas? And I was like, that doesn't even sound appropriate. Are we sure this is not just a bad translation? So we would joke about that. But then during the summers, I would come to the States. I did 3 internships, one in Arizona State, the other one, University of Michigan, University of Minnesota. And that's where I really got to explore this whole other nature, or this whole other side of what really science is. Like when you're going through undergrad, you're taking classes, you're really just learning content, right? But it isn't when you're actually in the lab, or you're actually doing things with your hands, that you're actually understanding the nature of what being a scientist is. And I was able to explore different fields, because I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you love science, you are extremely well-versed in all of the sciences that they are, or all the engineering. And that's not really true. Like, I can't sit and have a really deep conversation about physics, because that's not my training. I have a more life science based training. Can I have a conversation with the physicists? Of course. Do we take physics? Yes, but I'm not well versed in thermodynamics. So, and I wasn't interested in it, and that's okay. You can just because you like one section of science, but dislike the other, doesn't mean that you dislike science at all.
Right. And Dr. Mel said earlier in her interview that she's had this job or been in the field of microscopy for about 10 years, but she's still learning 10 years into her career. So I think it's always important to have an open mind to realize I'm going to keep learning. The minute I graduate, I don't have to know every single thing in my field. So I think that's important to stress.
The biggest, I would say, if there's one thing that anyone who's interested in science and in STEM in general, is that you want to be a lifelong learner. You're always interested in learning new things. What I know now does not compare to what I knew when I graduated college 10 years ago. And that includes both in science and in other aspects related to STEM. So you spend your whole life learning. And even people who are 30 years in a specific research area, they're constantly reading, they're going to conferences, they're talking to their peers, to other colleagues, and learning what is new. So science is constantly throwing out new information.
Mm-hmm.
So what we knew about viruses, for example, because that's a big topic right now, 20
Right.
years ago is nothing compared to what we know now.
Mm-hmm.
So technology and knowledge is constantly evolving. So the cool thing is you get to be part of that growth as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So Krizia, we're talking about how science is evolving, and I think um, talking about how things are evolving, being a lifelong learner is really important. And I think that you're working with a lot of young people in your job. So sharing that knowledge with them is really important. And are there things they ask you that you see themes of like they are concerned they don't know what they want to do, or they may want to change their major for the third time and feel bad about that? Can you kind of, and it's not bad if you want to change your major. That's a very normal thing. I changed mine once in college, so
The
that's a
average,
really normal thing.
I don't know what the average in STEM is, but I know the average in general is like 4 times. Like I never changed my major, but I know someone who's changed it 7 times. Because I think one of the things that I see is it right for me?
Hmm.
That's am I good enough? Which a lot of students have this, especially women and racially and ethnically disproportionately students. You see them that they don't see themselves as often in engineering and applied science. So they're not only are they going through the normal rhythm of taking a lot of classes, doing co-ops or internships to create a higher level of preparation, but then they're also struggling with that self-identity of like, am I good enough? And they are. Like, if you are good enough to do this, you don't have to be this perfect human being. Like I mentioned before, we have this misconstrued notion of scientists or anybody in the STEM field. When they're portrayed in media, they're portrayed as like basically geniuses. And there are individuals who are geniuses, but common folk can do science. You know, it's more about your perseverance and grit and wanting, just like Dr. Mel says, she really didn't like math when she was in high school, but that didn't stop her from studying physics and becoming a microscopist.
Right.
So you
Right.
have a UA. So I see that, like, what do I do next? And I always tell students your 20s are difficult. My 20s were difficult. I struggle a lot because you're still creating that sense of who you are and what you want to do. There's some people who have their whole life laid out and they go it by a T and it works, and that's perfectly fine. But then there's others, like I would say, who wonder but are not lost. They're just wondering and trying to discover their way. And both are okay.
Mm-hmm. Right. In the words of J.R.R. Tolkien, all who wander are not lost.
Yes.
So, nerd moment. Um, and you also talked about how when you're in college, you're studying the content, but it was when you were doing your internships in the summer that you were really learning. So I think it's really important if you're able to, as a student or maybe post student, to volunteer or to get an internship, just because that's how you know, I think, is
STEM is one of those
right.
fields that is that individuals are very fortunate to not only take the core classes but engage in cooperative education, which that's what co-op is for engineering. So basically you go out and you work, so
Mm-hmm.
you're getting actual real life experience. In science, for example, I did internships, so I would go for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and I would work on a specific topic, something very focus based. And it allowed me to not only develop skills that even if I didn't continue at that field, I could take those with me. But it also helped me develop knowledge about, other skills that aren't necessarily taught when you are just taking in the information, especially in those fields where you have to take in a lot of information first before actually going through hands-on. Like biology is one of those that you have to learn a lot of information in order to get more information out. You
Mhm.
can't just go into a lab and combine things and hope things go well. You need
No,
to
that
know
would
what
be incredibly unsafe.
no, yeah,
Don't
and
do
depending
that.
on the lab, it would be very critical. Yeah.
Right. Don't do that.
So
Yeah.
it is important. So they are paid internships, there are paid opportunities in a lot of institutions to do research, to make sure you do your co-ops. Don't wait until you graduate to actually get that extra experience.
Mhm.
Some
Mhm.
programs are embedded, like mine required the internships. That's why I went. UC required 5 co-ops. So you have to take your 5 co-ops in order to graduate. And I think that's really good because it's not just about the experience that you're putting on your resume, it's about learning who you are as an
Mhm.
individual. I have students who go to a company and they're like, I thought that this is what I wanted to do in mechanical engineering, but no. And they end up going, they still become mechanical engineers. They're just in another area.
Mhm.
And then it's a huge process of learning who you are, and it's okay to not like things.
Sure. And I don't think you can ever start too early. I was asking Scarlett earlier, you're a freshman, and a lot of high schoolers have opportunities. It might be harder during COVID, but to do job shadowing, to get to call someone, that could be a little intimidating, to cold call someone or email and ask them to hop on a Zoom call, but ask them about their job. A lot of people would love to talk about their jobs, and those that don't be discouraged because there's someone else that will. So, there's opportunities in high school even to go to camps or to get to meet people like Krizia and learn, do I like engineering? And Women in Engineering does that. You work with high schoolers too, correct?
Yes, yes. So, for example, I'm working on putting 2 camps this summer. So that's an opportunity for high schoolers to come and check things out. And, they might like one portion and be like, I don't want to do the rest. Jordan is not getting her degree in 12 engineering. She's getting her degree in one because she has one interest. Or she might have multiple, but you don't have time to get 10 degrees. You don't need them also.
Right, right.
But
Oh, so
you
many.
you have one interest, and that's okay, or you narrow it down into, and then as you learn, you are like, well, maybe I want to go into more environmental focus even though I'm a mechanical engineer, and how do I do that? So you
Yeah.
get to incorporate yourself into, because really, I mean, you should incorporate yourself because this is what you might be doing for a long time.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. And I did want to we touched on women in color and engineering earlier, but can you speak to your experiences as a woman in color in STEM? Was it different in Puerto Rico versus the States a little
Yeah,
bit?
so I always so I grew up, like I said, in Puerto Rico, and um I remember that whenever I was doing science over there, I knew I was a female, and also I was in a biology and life sciences, one of those more gender paired. They're almost to equity in
Okay.
terms of representation. If not, we've reached it, because a lot of individuals use it to go to medical school and stuff like that. But I remember that being a woman of color wasn't necessarily a thing for me while I was back home because we were all Latinos. So it's like being in the majority group here. You don't think about it because it wasn't until I came to the States and I did my internship and I noticed that. And then I came and did grad school, that being a woman of color became a very integral part of my identity. I was always a Latina, I was always a Puerto Rican, but it wasn't, being a Latina came into the more forefront when I was here. And then being the only one, I remember most of the time there was like one or two. I remember that when I went to grad school and I went to do more STEM education, I only had one Latino professor throughout, and that was it. That was my only colleague or educator that was from a background similar to mine. So it does, because then you start thinking, am I really, oh, should I even be doing this? There's things in culture that come up, and then I'm still a female. So, you know, I'm always, there's a way that males approach to doing things in STEM, and they might do it in every other day life, that females don't. Females tend to blame themselves when things don't go. They're like, oh, I must have done something wrong. Well, yes, I'm pretty sure we all do it in our everyday lives. I say sorry 300 times a day, even though it might not be my fault. I'm still learning. But I remember there was one time I was having an issue with an experiment, and I was talking to my male lab partner, and I was like, well, what are you doing wrong? And I was like, well, I've been doing everything to the T. And then sometimes you are doing everything right, and there's something that's happening that you're not understanding or you're not aware of yet. And I was like, well, if I'm doing something wrong, why don't you come and help me? And I remember he watching me, and he was like, well, I don't see anything that you're doing wrong. I was like, well, something are still going wrong because I'm having issues. And it so happens that after like weeks of trying to find out what I was doing wrong, it wasn't myself who was making a mistake. We were sharing an incubator with someone else, and there wasn't proper, they were not being forefront with with our lab as well. So that taught me that, you know what, it's not always my fault. I make mistakes and I will have failures, but it's not necessarily a reflection of who I am as an individual. And I feel females should know that. And one thing that I did learn, and I know a lot of people of color experience this, is that you feel like you have to overcompensate and you have to like work 10 times harder to prove that you're still good enough. But if you are in it, you are good enough and you are smart enough. So it is a process. So there's has been a lot of things that I've learned about myself, because it's not easy moving to a place that is different culturally, in the language, to the one that you grew up.
Yeah, no, thank you. That seemed very personal. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, I've heard other people I've interviewed who are people of color say similar things. And hopefully the more and more people who get into STEM, and the more and more women and women identifying and people of color, this is something that will become normal, as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so thank you. And you do STEM education, and what was your path to getting there? What about STEM education in particular interested you?
So when I was an undergrad, I was a student research mentor. So my undergrad had a high school program where high schoolers from 10th to 12th, because that's the high school range back home, would come in, and every Saturday we engage in research. Okay. So I was a mentor, and I ran a small bioinformatics group. And I really enjoyed it. And during my 20s, I was, in grad school, and I was like, well, I liked it. And then some personal things occur, and I had to step back, and I was like, what was the time that I really enjoyed? And although I enjoy being in the lab, it was working with those students that made me realize that I had a passion for STEM education. And then being here, having experienced those things by myself, made me realize, you know what, I really do want to go into it. And then I dove deeper. I learned more about the disparities, the discrepancies in education, the lack of resources that some students have. And that made me even be more passionate. And the struggles that women and people of color have in STEM, because a lot of them, if they get their degrees, not a lot of them stay in that area. They might go to something not adjacent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, thank you. And I don't really I interview college professors, but not a lot of STEM educators. So I really enjoy getting to interview someone who works with students very closely like you do. And since you do work with high schoolers and college students, what's the most rewarding aspect of that work?
This might sound very cheesy, but I like when
I love cheese. Let's go for it.
I like when I'm really happy when they're succeeding and they're happy.
Hmm.
Sometimes I've had students who realize that the major that they're in, they were doing it for someone else. And when they get to be in the major or exploring something that really makes them happy, that's fulfilling to me. Just being able to help individuals really, and it took me a long time
Yeah.
um, to realize that I really enjoyed doing that and that I wanted to do that. So that's the most fulfilling part, I guess. Helping a student, like if they want to go to college, making sure that that's a possible route for them, creating accessibility for everyone and helping them, both
Hmm.
personally and academically. I feel like we sometimes neglect that students are humans and their role is not just to go to school. They go through life just like adults, just like you have issues when you're an adult and you still have to go to work. Students have issues and they have to go to school.
Yeah.
So being able to help them in that sense too. So that is actually the most fulfilling part. I really like engaging with students.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I didn't think that was super cheesy.
Okay.
You know, it's okay. But if anyone wants to learn more about women in engineering, the program at UC, where can they go? Where can they go to learn more?
I would say you can either email us at we program at uc.edu, or you can check us at the ceas.uc.edu
Okay.
website and go into the Inclusive Excellence and Community Engagement. You'll learn more about our office where Women in Engineering is housed, and that's where we served a lot of our students in the College of Engineering and Applied Science.
Awesome. And we'll share links to that web address and those websites in
And
the
if you have any
description of this
questions
event.
about anything, whether it's like, how do I find the right school or whatever it might be, I'll give you my personal email and then they can email me and I'm more than happy
Thank
to talk.
you. Thank you very much. And my last question, because you're going to show us an experiment in a minute, but my last question before that is, what advice would you give to young women and girls who may want to pursue a career in the STEM field, women of color too?
I would say to just keep going and don't let the haters hate. I mean, they're going to hate, but don't let them stop you. You have the ability and you are capable of achieving more than you think. I know that sounds very like inspirational and stuff like that, but um you are going to doubt yourself and that's okay. And when people think or say that you're not doing stuff or like they're trying to bring you down, that's when you are doing the right thing and you are going. So just there are going to be hard times, but don't get discouraged. Find someone or a group of people who you can talk to so you can share, because then you're going to realize you're not the only one alone. You're not alone. Basically, there's a lot of us that go through these struggles, and even professionals still do. It doesn't stop as soon as you get your degree, like especially if you're a person of color, or a woman in engineering. It like these any issues, until we change the culture, these issues will still stay, but you can be part of the change.
Mhm.
So I guess that's it. I don't know. I
No,
rambled a lot.
no, that was great. No, there's a lot that you said that even adults need to hear. I'm like almost 10 years into my career and I still have doubts. So
I
it's
still
good
have
for,
mentors,
yes.
and my
Oh,
mentors have mentors
yes.
because you can't do things alone.
Mm-mm. No, not at all. So thank you. And I'm excited to see what we're going to do.